So I was browsing YouTube and I stumbled upon a great video by Portal Runner showing how NES games can be played inside of Portal 2. This immediately intrigued me and made me wonder, what if you could play any games inside of the Source engine? Follow me on my journey from just a simple colored pixel all the way to a playable Doom, complete with input and audio. I've chosen Half-Life 2 for this project because I've been using this in the past already. It doesn't have any of that fancy VScript stuff, so I gotta work harder to do cursed things in it. Let's start by creating a screen. Just place a bunch of one-sided cube brushes, give each of them a unique name, and there you go. Using ENT Fire, I can change the color, so the red, green and blue values of each pixel, by modifying the render color property. Alright, that's cool, but let's see how big we can actually go. So HL2 has a brush entity limit of 2048. I tried to go barely below that, but pixel number 1000 caused a pre-cache error. So this seems to limit our resolution. I ended up going for 40 by 23, which is 920 pixels in total. Now to actually try showing something on the screen. I first thought of using the I/O system for this, but there's a major problem. There's no way to dynamically do string concatenation in the I/O system, meaning I would need a separate input for every pixel and for every possible color that I'd want to show. This would be very limiting. So then I looked back at how I initially changed the pixel colors, which is ENT Fire. So I just wrote down a bunch of ENT Fire commands and let them run simultaneously. My initial idea was to send those console commands through the hijack parameter. It sends console commands to an already running instance of hl2.exe. Since there's a length limit on launch parameters of an application, I resorted to storing the commands in a config file and to run it with the exec command. This allows me to generate a config file that renders an image. Some pixels are wrongly colored, it's some off by one, both in the entity names and in my program logic. I only noticed that fairly late, so hopefully this won't bother you too much throughout the video. Now the interesting part is to figure out animation. I wrote a program in Rust, which basically generates a new config file in a loop, and then it runs hl2.exe with the hijack parameter to send the new frame data over. Of course, running in exe is not cheap, so my PC quickly became unresponsive until I added a wait or a delay between the process launches. So this allowed me to show animations like this. Before I went to record this part, I had huge problems getting a frame rate that's higher than like 5 or 10 FPS, and that's because of how long the HL2 actually takes to launch, just to send a console command. I tried so many workarounds, including like pre-rendering multiple frames at once, and using wait commands in the config to evenly pace those frames, which simulates a higher FPS. But this would introduce latency, which is a problem for games. So I was completely stuck at this point and felt like I couldn't improve anything, until I realized, why am I even doing all of this useless shit? I'm just gonna yeet the HL2 launching stuff, I'm just gonna use a timer entity in the map to reload the config. I don't know how I didn't think of this in advance, it makes so much sense now. Like, sure, this now means that the config, being written and read, is not in perfect sync anymore. But as long as my program is fast enough and it keeps track of the real time, you're going to be seeing new frames every time you reload the config. So this now allows us to render like 20 FPS of video, which is pretty cool. If we try going any faster than that, the game is gonna start dropping frames, because there's too many config files to load at once. Which would, of course, remove all gains of running the command faster to begin with. So this result here is around the best I could find as a middle ground. Next up, I wanted some interactivity, so I was thinking about how to get information from the game back to the program. For this, the console seemed like the most intuitive answer. There's a log command, which seems to also send logs to a UDP address. I coded a quick UDP socket and tried listening to its output, and nothing came back. Even Wireshark says that there's nothing being sent by the game. I just ended up using the console log file instead. It's a bit annoying to work with, because the file quickly grows to an unreasonable size and I have to clear it every now and again, but at least now I can retrieve any information from the console and load it directly into my program, which is reading the console file line by line on a separate thread. So what can we actually write to the console? Well, using the game UI entity, we can detect various key presses as part of the map. Wiring those outputs to console prints makes it so that we can detect WASD and left and right click, both being pressed and being released. There are also flags on the entity to disable it when you press jump or E, the interact key. So we can use that to connect the deactivated output and make it print something while also reactivating the entity immediately again. Mouse look is a bit more difficult. There is a getPos command which retrieves the position and rotation of the camera. This works fine if we want to be able to walk around in a room and our crosshair acts kind of like a mouse pointer. So simply spam that command on a really fast timer and the log being read will always have up-to-date camera information. With some simple geometry math, we can calculate the direction vector from the camera's rotation. Turn that into an array which intersects with the screen plane, do some bounce checking, and you've got a mouse cursor. Cool, we can even draw lines with it. Or we can make an interactive powder toy kind of game. I'm not really convinced at this point. Like, it's cool and all, but you could probably recreate this stuff using a bunch of look triggers and I/O. What if I went further? What if I made a playable game, like Doom, or Half-Life 2 within Half-Life 2, or any program or game inside of Half-Life 2 for that matter? But before that, something has been bothering me. Many of my inputs are just randomly consumed, and I had no idea why. I noticed that the log file sometimes just didn't separate stuff properly, like there should be a new line right here. So I just tweaked my code and removed some junk that was on each of the lines, because trying to parse multiple lines at once seemed like a daunting task in comparison. I'm at source, why can't you just print things properly? Okay, so for Doom, the mouse cursor thing isn't really useful. I also didn't want to use the keyboard for looking around, I'm a mouse kinda guy. So that's where getPos hits its limits. My idea was to simply use a view controller entity to force the camera to look at my screen, and the player in the background could freely move and look around. The only problem is that getPos actually returns the information of the camera, meaning the rotation numbers aren't actually changing when I'm forcing the camera to look at something. I was trying to figure out a way to print the rotation of an entity forever. There is the cldrawPos command, which I even considered using OCR on just to retrieve the information from it. But alas, I couldn't find any way to actually print anything to console, and the OCR idea was just ridiculous. So I was just recording background videos for this segment. I tried random commands in the console to make it look like it's all hopeless and stuff, but I accidentally typed getPos2, and somehow that actually works, and it gives me the exact info that I need. It's such a funny coincidence, but whatever, it's too late for this knowledge now, back to past me being hopeless and struggling. So what did I do? Well, the next best thing, I locked the player in place by using a really large invisible brush, and I parent the monitor to the player so that it stays in view at all times. Well, kind of. Looking up and down breaks it, because the rotation pivot is on the player's feet. But well, in Doom at least, you don't really need to move the mouse up or down, so it doesn't matter. As for integrating Doom, I thought it would be simple to just take Doom and launch it directly from my program. Not as an executable, but as a library. However, there surprisingly isn't a Rust integration of Doom anywhere. There's some rewrites of it, but there's no actual port. I found this project called Doom Generic by Ozkl, which seems to have cleaned up some of the original Doom code to make porting it easier. I had to hack my way around it a bit so I can expose a small set of functions for my program to interact with Doom, and to compile as a static library. I need a way to initialize the game, process each tick, send mouse inputs, keyboard inputs, as well as retrieving the current contents of the frame buffer for my screen. With my port of library Doom Generic complete, I connected it all to Rust, and something is wrong. Okay, the blue and red channels are just swapped. Here we go. So after a bit of bug hunting and lots of debugging two codebases at once, I got something working. Doom has its own mechanism for keeping track of time, so I can't make it run faster than 35 FPS it seems. I also noticed that the screen melting effect doesn't seem to render properly. I think it's because the game freezes the main thread while it happens. So it's not perfect, but I think it's very recognizable still. Around this time, I experimented with upgrading the screen, so instead of using brush entities, I would use a custom model instead. A friend of mine had the silly idea that you could do interlacing this way. You see, with body groups, I can move the pixel to a different position without actually having to send any coordinates. Furthermore, if the background of my scene was no draw, the scene wouldn't actually redraw, meaning that if I moved the pixel elsewhere, you would still see the old data of the pixel in the previous position, meaning that teleporting it back and forth could give the illusion of higher resolution. The only problem with that is that newer versions of Half-Life 2 actually always clear the screen, so even no draw just renders as black. I'm very disappointed. This idea would have been so silly, but so great. I discarded the whole idea with models altogether. Sure, they might have higher limits than brush entities, experimenting with them could have maybe increased the resolution further, even without interlacing, but honestly, Hammer was really struggling at this point, and this whole project has been going on for way too long, so I might revisit this at some other time. So all the audio you've been hearing from Doom, it's actually fake, obviously. You wouldn't be hearing anything, because there's no way to play arbitrary sound in Source Engine. I could have maybe used like multiplayer and voice chat, but Half-Life 2 is obviously a single-player game. Alternative ideas could have been to use something like Fourier transform, so I could replicate any sound file by using differently pitched sine waves. But my idea was actually much easier and much sillier. It's time to reverse engineer the music file format of Doom. There's actually a guide written by Vladimir Arnost that explains the format of Doom's music, but again, there's no library to just read a muse file. They're similar to MIDI in structure, but different enough that existing parsers just wouldn't work. It was quite a struggle to get something to work properly, even with the guide. I had to rewrite my parsing code at least once completely. But hey, in the end, I got a list of instructions of which instrument I should play, when and on what pitch.
Something's walking in the garden and is breaking all of the gnome statues.
Well, just wait until the song starts. As for the instruments themselves, I obviously didn't just use the MIDI instruments, that would be cheating, right? So I just looked through the Half-Life 2 sound catalog and picked any sounds that seemed close enough. Yeah, those are basically the same. Weirdly enough, changing the sound file of an ambient generic entity midway through sometimes works, but not always. You get some errors about a sound not being pre-cached, and I have no idea how to actually make it do that. So I just added some dummy sound players just to get it to work. With all that done, I can finally reveal what Doom actually sounds like. I also added gun firing sounds when you left-click for immersion purposes. Let's check it out. Isn't this perfectly immersive? It's so bad but charming in its own way, I think. I don't have a great ear for pitches in general, so I didn't really bother tuning any of the instruments. There's probably lots you can do if you're a musician to try to improve things. Also, here's me beating the first level and entering the second level. There's some bugs to work out, like why some inputs are still not being properly received. It's probably something to do with multi-threading, but that's something I'm a bit afraid of digging deeper into. At this point I felt like nothing could stop me. I wanted to go further. Half-Life 2 within Half-Life 2. Other games. MS Paint. The possibilities are endless. But the problem with all of these is I didn't have any ways to send input to them. You know, I gotta keep Half-Life 2 focused so I can move the mouse and press buttons. But then how do I send inputs to the other games and programs? There's the Windows API that I could use for this, but for most apps it doesn't actually work because they all use other APIs to listen to these inputs. I also tried AutoHotkey and it's the same problem. The only APIs that work are those that actually need the window to be focused as well. I later on realized that controllers are actually amazing, because they even work when the game is not focused. But there's two problems with the controller. One, I need to be able to send virtual joystick inputs from my program. For that I would probably need to install a software driver or something, and at that point I just wasn't ready to commit to this. And two, I have no idea how to make one of my Half-Life 2s not receive controller input at all. I didn't want both games to receive the controller input and look around and walk around. I tried many console commands, none of them worked. And since I didn't want to mess with binds or sensitivity, in the end I just scrapped the whole thing. This is also one of those maybe some other day projects. Anyway, this was very dumb but very fun. I hope you enjoyed seeing it all come together and that you enjoyed hearing me ramble about it as well. Hello? What? What? Are you seeing this? Am I smoking something? What am I?